Hi everyone, welcome to the room. I think we're gonna start now. This session is co-organized by UNDP and Myanmar Witness. I'm gonna pass the floor to Helena, who is the moderator for the session.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I hope my sound works okay. Yes, I see a slight nodding. That's always encouraging. Yes, let me welcome you to our next session. We will now focus on collaborating between global and local, utilizing data and open source investigation for preventing violent extremism and addressing hate speech. Perhaps I can start by introducing myself. My name is Helena Sterwe. I'm the Conflict Prevention and Peacebuilding Team Leader in the UNDP Crisis Bureau, and I have the pleasure of moderating this session today, which is going to, among other things, really delve into how multi-stakeholder partnerships can help fill the gaps in data and empower policy and decision makers to take really proactive data-informed measures for early action. But I'm also very happy to welcome our distinguished speaker. We have an excellent panel in this session that I look forward to engaging with. Perhaps I could introduce you in no particular order if that is fine for everyone. First, we have and I should say that they will share their insights also from our partnerships in Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So really linking also to national context, which is excellent, I think, in terms of approach for this kind of discussion. First, we have Saijai Liangpunsakul, who is the project director of Myanmar Witness. He's joining us in person, I am told, although I don't see him on the stage as a panelist today. I think there was a slight slight update. So let me just continue. We'll see what has happened there. Ms. Liangpunsakul works on hate speech, open source investigation, and mitigating online harm. She was part of the team to set up Myanmar Witness, an open source investigation unit to document human rights abuse. Perhaps colleagues can guide me as to where we have the speaker for the moment. Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed is our second panelist. He is a professor of international relations at the University of Dhaka, who is joining us online. I think this seems very much the case. He's also the executive director of the Center for Alternatives in Dhaka and an adjunct professor at Taylor's University in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He has published more than 125 research papers and scholarly articles and is really an expert in tolerance and terrorism, among other topics, and has been an academic partner of UNDP Bangladesh initiative to understand and prevent hate speech, digital harm, and associated intolerance and violence in Bangladesh. Our third panelist is Asad Baig, who's the founder of the Media Lab, Pakistan's first incubator and accelerator for tech-based digital media startups, who's also joining online today. As a journalist, a techie, and a media strategist, he is also the founder of Pakistan's leading media development and watchdog organization, Media Matters for Democracy, which has been a partner organization for UNDP in Pakistan's initiative on development journalism. To kickstart the discussion, if I may, just to offer a little bit of a framing, I would like to share some lessons and reflections from UNDP's programming on preventing violent extremism and addressing hate speech across more than 40 countries. If we look at the global context, I think there are several meta-trends that come into play here, but certainly the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic is continuing to impact the most vulnerable in a very disproportionate way, and that's really deepened the pre-existing drivers of extremism, such as inequalities and grievances, placing hard-won peace building and development gains at risk. And this is also aggravating distrust in government response and attesting to eroding social contracts between states and people across the globe. Making hate speech and polarization a trend which unfortunately remains to be on the rise. The growth of activities in the digital space since the onset of the pandemic, just to tie it to one of these mega trends, has led to an increased exposure to violent extremism, material and hate speech online. And one way of addressing this, of course, would be to make sure that we have a robust investment into digital peace-building solutions, including through the use of data that proactively can address violent extremism and address these challenges. And this is why today's discussion is so timely. From UNDP's perspective, with your support, critical support, I would even venture to say, as partners and under the overall guidance of the UN Plan of Action to Prevent Violent Extremism, UNDP is addressing these threats by online radicalization and hate speech across Africa, Arab states, the Asia Pacific, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So really a rather global approach, which also a testimony to that we see, unfortunately, these kind of challenges really on a global scale. From our perspective, the prevention offer, and in terms of where we put our emphasis to address and prevent violent extremism, we support increased understanding of extremist and hateful narratives and its impacts on societies through, for instance, monitoring efforts. We support identifying the underlying grievances leading to violent extremism, so really the drivers behind these dynamics. We support designing, identifying, and scaling up programs to prioritize addressing the drivers and root causes of extremist and hateful narratives. And finally, we also support, again, with our partners, offering alternative and positive narratives that can help counter online propaganda and prevent violent extremism. Coming back then to the thematic for today's discussion and how all of this links to the critical role of data. The shift to greater global connectivity through the internet offers heightened opportunities, of course, for violent extremist groups to network, to spread propaganda and divisive narratives. On the other hand, and this is the other side of the coin, it also offers opportunity to use this, the prevalence of these narratives as a way of monitoring these trends and to look at factors that play into radicalization and hate speech through monitoring in ways that were possibly previously not possible, simply. This is why we are investing, as you will know, working closely with us in data and digital tools to monitor and try to understand these trends in violent extremism and hate speech. I think also it's worth just mentioning that the collection, analysis, and application of data of violent extremism narratives from these digital platforms, including social media, is really a way to improve effectiveness, legitimacy, and relevance of policies when it comes to preventing extremism. This is, of course, another avenue of how UNDP engages in this area. We have also, as I mentioned at the outset, of course, partnership, again, on a global basis. For instance, across the Asia Pacific, we have supported early warning efforts through monitoring that include mapping digital ecosystems and establishing violence monitoring centers that can help identify trigger points for violence. In Sri Lanka, UNDP is working with the President Coordinator's Office, supporting local CSO monitoring and identifying and analyzing public social media, just to mention a few examples. But perhaps before going into all of these details, I would like to use the time that we have really to give the floor to our excellent panelists. And this would first bring me to Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, UNDP's partnerships for tolerant and inclusive Bangladesh partnered with the Dhaka University and the Sector Foundation and affirm to leverage real-time data from millions of data points for evidence-based action to prevent violent extremism. And as part of this project, the Dhaka University-based Bangladesh Peace Observatory has been established as the largest data source of violence in Bangladesh. So let me perhaps address first Professor Ahmed. Would you like to perhaps elaborate on how this partnership has allowed for the Peace Observatory to function, and how have you seen that government authorities, civil society organizations, academics, students, economists, and foreign investors have utilized the Bangladesh Peace Observatory's data to design policies and projects, laws and budgets? And maybe also ask you, just to guide your thoughts and intervention, what role do you think academic institutions can play to improve data collection and analysis for violence prevention? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Helena, I was trying to get into my slides. I don't see that. Do you have my slides? Because I sent it to Saijai earlier, but he's not sitting there also. Let me try to share the screen. And I have no idea how this works, but let's see.
Professor Imtiaz, we are investigating behind. The investigation team is working behind here.
Okay. Because I already have sent the slide. I don't think I can get it from here. I don't think I can send it from here. I don't think I can share it from here. So if somebody can share it, can they? Yes or no? Can it be shared?
I think we will know in 1 minute.
Okay. Okay. We wait. In the meantime, I think Helena can continue if you want to.
Yes, thank you. I think colleagues are looking into if we can support you with the slides. So I understand that you would like maybe to hold off until we have this figured out. Perhaps unless there is a quick reaction on that point, perhaps we can just reshuffle the order of speakers, allowing this to be settled if you prefer. Maybe that's your intervention now.
I think that'll be excellent.
Okay, let me do that then. So then with the swift turn of events, we will shift our focus to a different national context. So let's go to Myanmar, where Myanmar Witness is an open source investigation unit to document human rights abuse, including the use of social media to spread hate speech. And perhaps then I can invite Saijai, if I may speak informally. Could you share some concrete examples on how open source investigation has been instrumental in documenting human rights situation in Myanmar, and how it has contributed to bringing justice and accountability? Then I'm happy to give the floor to you. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helena, and thank you so much, UNDP and the organizer to organize this event. I wanted to start with, we talk about data for peace, but there can't be peace if there's no justice and accountability. And this is the work that we try to do at Myanmar Witness. So I just want to share quickly about how we got started. Also, what are the collaboration, which is the goal of this session, and what are the impact that we try to do. So quickly go to the origin of the story. How did we get started? In Myanmar, I think you're probably familiar, it's a country with ongoing conflict that have been under military for more than 50 years. And under the recent coup that happened, a lot of people has been killed. Right now, until today, about more than 4,000 people had been killed. So right after the coup, a lot of people feel hopeless, and I was part of the person that feel hopeless. And I saw that there are so many images, pictures of people have been tortured, and the fire that been burned, posted on social media, on X, Twitter, Facebook account and such. So a group of us decided that we should do something with all the images and photos that been posted online. We know that if the information was online, it would be removed because it violates community standard. So we just asked people to send information to us if they see any images or video. And by doing that, we have so many images that people start sending it to us. That's how we got started. And then we collaborate with the organization in the UK, Center for Information Resilience, that they have been doing a lot of work on open source investigation. So that's how Myanmar Witness got started. Our goal is to document human rights abuse that we hope one day it could bring peace and justice to Myanmar. So just to go into how do we do the work? So we have 3 channels in the way that people could send information. So first, people could submit information to us with the link. Second, each day we go on social media and scrape the data online to see if there are any information on human rights abuse. And the third option is that we collaborate with various civil society that have been documenting human rights abuse. So these are 3 sources of information that we collect. So far, we've been collecting more than 8,000 incidents that we send it to the international IWM, which is independent investigation mechanism from Myanmar, established by the UN. So this team is a fact-finding mission to compile all the evidence on Myanmar. So this is how we send our evidence from the ground to the UN mechanism, hoping one day it could go to the court and bring justice. But I just want to emphasize that this process takes a long time. As you all here know, in order to bring peace and justice to the country, this process at ICC and ICJ take a long time. So how do we look into impact? At least we look into impact in 3 ways. First, the long-term impact that I mentioned, we hope that the evidence that we collect on the ground, the data that we collect, open source data, would bring to the court, which is ICC and ICJ, to this mechanism that audit 8,000 cases that we've been collect. That's one long-term goal in terms of impact. The second way that we look into it is the short and the medium-term goal. So in the medium term, we have been documenting all this abuse. Just one example, we were able to identify from the open source picture that Russia has been sending weapons to Myanmar. So these are the open source data and information that we collect. So we were able to identify and verify that it's actually happening. And we actually contact various embassies and also talking to the UN and UK embassy, raising this as a concern. So as the result, the UN actually issued a statement asking all countries to stop sending weapons to Myanmar. So this is an example of the medium-term impact of using open source investigation to bring justice and accountability. So that's a long-term and medium-term. In the short term, we actually working with various media agencies. We're working with CNN, BBC, Washington Post, to bring issue into the news, to make people of Myanmar remember that the world hasn't forget about them. So these are the short-term goals that we wanted to do. Anyway, so that's are the 3 impacts that we wanted to have. I will pass the floor to Helena.
Thank you so much for that intervention and for pointing to, I think, really critical features such as the time frame for these kind of engagement. We're talking about, of course, preventive action. And I think it's interesting, to look at what point can we engage and through which means to be impactful when it comes to preventing violent extremism. Is it focusing, on monitoring, on data, on deterring, or on deterrence, or in capturing these negative narratives? Or is it possible to come in even earlier, when you see for instance, the formation of exclusive identities, creating maybe in-group and out-group identities in online narratives. I apologize also for not spotting you at the outset. Somehow I had set up my screen in a way that I could not see the in-person application, let's say. Excellent to have your intervention, so thank you so much for that. Then I understand from colleagues that we now are able to support Dr. Ahmed with your presentation. So I think we can go back to your intervention, and perhaps those that have access would then move to screening that. to support your intervention.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Please, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Helena. Well, Center for Alternatives, started looking into this data, or the people working at the center actually, they're tied up with the University of Dhaka for the last 5-6 years. And it started working, as you know, we had a very bad incident way back in 2016, the Holy Artisan incident, when a lot of Japanese were killed. A number of Bangladeshis were also killed on a terrorist attack. That actually created a kind of, I would say, attention to see how data can be collected on violent extremism. So I was approached by UNDP 7-8 years back to see how it can be done. So what we have now, next slide, please. Yeah, if you look at the next slide, we will see it's called Bangladesh Peace Observatory. And we now have the largest data on violence in Bangladesh. And the idea was not only to map violent extremism, but all kinds of violence, because some of them are related. So what we ended up is, mapping violence on 26 categories. And we now have data of over 10 years. It's 11 years now. Data we have, and probably the largest data. And UNDP New York actually provided us with the technical support way back. And so the data is very robust. And they looked into the data and found that 96% are error-free. And these are from the open sources. They're altogether national, over 18 national and local dailies. But what we do at the same time is something we call micro-narratives. We collect life stories. So whenever there are discrepancies, we train young people, particularly students, who go and collect life stories. It's not interview, it's not ethnography as such, it's collecting life stories, and it can be anyone. It can be a doctor, a taxi driver, a rickshaw puller, anyone, because everyone experiences violence. And so when you collect around 300 to 400 micro-narratives, then you sit down, a senior group of researchers, they sit down to see the commonalities and the exceptionalities in the micro-narratives, and they try to cluster them. And of course, after that, you can go for an FGD if you want to. So idea is to mix the quantitative with the qualitative. So it's not only the data that we collect, but the micro-narratives also play an important role. So, it can be used in many ways. It's open source data. Anybody can go into. It's called Bangladesh Peace Observatory. You can just link up, and all the publications are there. There's, every month there's peace graphics. Every 3 months there's peace report. Stakeholders immediately get into it to see what is the state of violence. So what I will do in the time that I have is to give you some, looking at some data on some of the things, some of the topics. Let's see. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah, this is the electoral violence data of last 11 years, where you can see a number of deaths. 641 in last 11 years. Well, death rate per million would be 0.35, but any death is bad. I'm always against quantifying death, but it gives a sense of, the number of incidents, number of injury, number of arrests, and then, of course, you can look into the trends. Next slide, please. Yeah, the next, this slide will show you the trends. And there you can start analyzing and seeing that it's not rising all the time. A lot of people will electoral violence is getting bad every year. That is not the case, because you can see the data in terms of, particularly with the death, it has been low, but even with the injury and number of incidents, it goes up and down. And that shows that, the general idea that is going up and up, that's not true. And one has to analyze why in that particular year it went up and why it is down. You can do an analysis. And we did actually, before the last national election, the UNDP called us to look into the data on election and see the state of violence. And the reason was the Bangladesh Election Commission wanted to know. So we, the only condition that we had not to publish it before the election, which we agreed. We thought, that's not our task. So we did, map the election violence before the last national election. And interestingly, we came out with 3 colors, red, green, and yellow. And we mapped, in fact, the last 5 national elections. We went back to history, and we found out that, there are areas where it has been green in all the elections. So it's not that all are red. There are, and that's, of course, some are yellow where, some elections they had violence, some elections they did not. But there are areas in Bangladesh which is green, which also puzzles us, because the same political parties are working, but in some areas you don't see violence. And then, of course, when the micro narratives started coming, we come to know why that is the case. Next slide, please. Now, violence against women, you can see the death rate per million is much higher, 4.58. It's 11 years data, with 8,320, which, if you look at the electoral violence and violence against women, I think this seems to be more critical, and probably less attention is given on this rather than on electoral violence. So, you can, combine a lot of data. You can also do some triangulation and see, what's the role of each of these categories. But this, I think, is interesting. Of course, you need to also see the regional data and the international data to see the state of violence against women and how, we have not succeeded in many places of the world in trying to limit that. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at the trend also, this is also very, very interesting, the trend. One can see there also it goes up and down. The death is almost constant. If you see the red color, you can see it's quite constant. Also, the incident also remains a little bit of that. But then, interesting, but the number of arrests has gone up really, and that also probably the reason why it seems that there's a decline in recent times. But this also requires further research. My third group of slides, next slide, please. My third category would be, the final category would be violent extremism. Now, this is the overview of violent extremism in last 11 years. Death is not that much, but as I said, a single death is really bad. It's 0.12. That's not a big figure. The global figure, and if you take other countries, probably get higher figure. But it gives you a sense. But more important, if you look at the trend, and go to the next slide, please. Yeah, if you look at violence-related incidents trend, it really went up in 2016, and in a particular 2016, and I pointed out the Holy Artisan incident. But after that, it has really come down. The death has come down to 0, actually, literally 0. But you can never be complacent with violent extremism. One incident can, make things bad. New Zealand is a good example where it's a peaceful country, but then one incident really made them, panic. The whole country got panicked. Next slide, please. Now, I guess number of errors, now white has come down to 0. I think the number of errors you can see also very, is getting up. Way back in 2016, yes, number of decks were very high, but even now it has gone down. But that could also be the reason why there is more attention on violent extremism. And of course, government's policy of zero tolerance also has contributed in making that less threatening at this stage as I speak. But as I say, you can never be complicit with violent extremism. Next, please. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this intervention and for sharing your reflections with us. Also here, I think you touched upon many critical points. Certainly from my perspective, I think it brings about 2 key reflections. One, it relates to, you spoke about different kinds of violence and monitoring that in relation to data. So it's not just, a single category. We can look at electoral violence, violence against women. And I think from a, if you look at this from a preventive perspective, maybe it has some, relevance when it comes to what are we monitoring again and when, because once we see these narratives online, the really hate speech and indications of the presence of violent extremism, somehow we are quite late, right? So I think it is very interesting to cast the net a bit wider, as you have done, to really capture different kinds of violence through data applications in many ways. And then the challenge is, of course, what do we see, and then on what basis do we try to engage and to kind of change those trajectories, which I think is an overarching challenge for this field. Another point that somehow also came out from your interventions, I think, is the value of multi-stakeholder partnership. The question of who has access to this data, and again, the question about action. When we see this, how do we behave and how do we try to engage in a constructive manner so as to influence in a more positive direction these trends in society? So thank you so much for that intervention. With that, I would then turn to our third speaker in our distinguished panel, Mr. Asad Baig. I would like to invite you to share the lessons that you have learned through leading media development and watchdog organization Media Matters for Democracy, including through the establishment of the Trends Monitor, which identifies and documents potential manipulation of political trends, hashtags, and conversations on Twitter in Pakistan through so-called human bots, if I understand well. I'm sure you will speak to that. Perhaps I can ask also a question to you. And again, if I may be informal, Asad, how do you see the media's role in promoting peaceful coexistence, particularly through flagging hate speech and discrimination during elections and beyond? And how can media use such data for fact-based and conflict-sensitive journalism? Over to you, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helena. So I'll take about a couple of minutes and give you the summary of what we are doing in Pakistan, and then I'll talk a bit about context and what we are aiming to do, and also a bit about potential collaboration. So you mentioned Trends Monitor. That was actually in 2018. So in the last elections, which happened in 2018 in Pakistan, we developed something called Trends Monitor, which was specifically a framework for Twitter. So now what we have done is that we have a bunch of tools which we have put into a collection of tools called Trends Monitor Toolkit, and through which essentially you can collect open source data and open source intelligence and essentially all sorts of data from not just Twitter, but Facebook, TikTok, and WhatsApp as well. So I'll talk a bit about that. So essentially what happened was that in the last election, we realized that there was a massive influx of misinformation, like electoral misinformation. And there was this phenomena of paid influencers, which kind of also act as human bots, a term that we coined internally to represent people who have bot-like activities on platforms, social media platforms. And in this election, and because Pakistan is about to have the elections in 2024, in the Feb of 2024, And now we are realizing that this trend has taken a much more deep-rooted sort of existence in the Pakistan's political culture. And international research also suggests that the people, the news consumers and information consumers are actually now tuning more into influencer-based content and less into the mainstream media, which kind of also, in a way amplifies political disinformation. So to counter that, what we have done is we have developed something called Trends Monitor Toolkit, as I mentioned, which is a bunch of tools, basically, which allows you to collect data from Facebook, from TikTok, from Twitter, and from WhatsApp. So essentially what we're aiming to do is to devise a way, obviously for the early warning systems as well, but also to pinpoint the digital hotspot of a certain kind of misinformation and hate speech. So I'll come to that in just a minute. So the aim that we were the main objective that we were trying to accomplish by doing this was to empower the mainstream media, as you rightly pointed out, Helena, and kind of amplify their role and augment their role of fact-checking and verifying information. So the traditional way that the fact-checking is conducted, because we are a media development organization, so our focus naturally is on digital rights and media development interventions. So the traditional the way fact-checking is conducted is usually after something has gone viral. And that, to me, is the weakest point and the weakest way you can fact-check information, because then the people will consume the information from the standpoint of misinformation so they pretty much made their minds about the information that they're consuming. And the misinformation comes as a very corrective measure, which the research has shown us that it almost never works. So what the concept that we were trying to develop with some of the leading media houses in Pakistan was something called proactive listening for misinformation and hate speech. And by that, I mean proactive listening in a way that the media and the newsrooms can actually identify misinformation, which can trigger certain fault lines. For instance, in Pakistan, religion is one of the biggest fault lines we have. Then we have the whole ethnic debate and so on and so forth, right? Same goes for Bangladesh, same goes for India. Gender, for instance, is a big trigger point in Pakistan, right? So the idea is that the mainstream media is empowered enough to listen for particular kind of misinformation which has the ability to go viral. And they fact check it before it goes viral. And so this is essentially in a nutshell. And what we are trying to develop is essentially a framework through which the media can do that. And this is easier said than done, because most of the APIs of the platforms are closed. Twitter has recently, everybody knows what Twitter has gone through after the Musk acquisition. And then we've seen Facebook limiting access to the CrowdTangle, the tool that they have. TikTok is already closed, and same goes for WhatsApp. There is no way of monitoring WhatsApp's public group and whatnot, right? So essentially what we are trying to achieve with this toolkit is to be able to triangulate this information in a way that the hotspot and the actors are identified. And then we are trying to link this with, so that's the phase one. The phase two is that we are in the process at this point of establishing a hate monitoring unit within Media Matters for Democracy, right? And the objective of that particular action is to identify the misinformation, specifically the kind that can cause or incite violence. And B, connect this with a lot of law enforcement, specifically law enforcement institutions in Pakistan, which are actively looking for the kind of information that can cause unrest in a way or manner, but they're very low tech. So they generally don't have any form of digital monitoring happening on the platforms. And whereas platforms are the breeding ground of misinformation and hate speech in many ways, specifically platforms like TikTok, which are now very, very popular and giving a lot of people, the first timers who are actually joining the internet are joining through TikTok in Pakistan at least. And the other main objective that we are aiming for is to create a certain amount of data-based evidence through which we can actually watchdog some of the social media platforms. Now, this is a big debate because we know for sure, and we have ample research, Facebook papers, and various other whistleblower actions have proven amply that the algorithms of social media platforms, they amplify hate. And in one way or another, they kind of create an echo chamber where the hate speech can really cause problems, right? So the third objective of what we are doing essentially is to create database evidence for the platforms like Meta and TikTok, and to show them how the misinformation and hate speech on the platforms is actually causing problems physically in the space. And finally, we've recently realized that there are many applications for this kind of the toolkit that we have developed. And what we are trying to do now is essentially see how, in collaboration with other local NGOs across the world, we can try and pretty much replicate what we are doing in Pakistan. So one of the recent things that we have tried with the toolkit is specifically to, on a global scale, listen for gender-based disinformation. And we're also in the process of kind of piloting that certain action. But what we aim to do is to generate like a cohesive report of how gender-based disinformation, essentially gender disinformation, is A, being perpetrated, and B, how is what are the exact impact that it's causing on the ground. Obviously, it's going to be a small-scale report, but I feel that there can be a lot of potential collaborations with similar organizations across the globe who can use some of this information. So I'll stop here, and I'll be more than happy to answer any specific questions that the participants or the viewers may have specifically about the toolkit and the data that we are collecting.
Thank you so much for that, Asad. Very interesting intervention. Yes, we can go to questions, perhaps on the floor, a bit later on in the discussion. Maybe I can just touch upon some of the points that you flagged up that I found particularly interesting. So I think that the broader point on political misinformation, political disinformation, and how impactful that is in many contexts. I think that this is a very interesting area when it comes to monitoring and sort of data applications for how to capture this. And somehow, again, if we think about, being early, capturing these trends early on, again, with a view to trying to influence a more positive trajectory, I think that is a very powerful lens, let's say. Now, when we see that this is starting to pop up, hate speech, of course, but also in a way, politically based misinformation, which is, seeking to create exclusion patterns or identities that feel marginalized, for instance, and then maybe trying to manipulate these, in line with the more extremist intentions, let's say. I think it's definitely an interesting and valid sort of lens in terms of how we can look at PV and data and how it can apply. Perhaps we can have also a little exchange with the panel. I had some questions that I wanted to pose to you. Maybe I can pose one simultaneously to Saijai and Asad if you're fine with this approach. I think some of the questions that we face engaging with the question of data and PV, it sometimes so our partners' thoughts, let's say, they go in the direction of ethical considerations when it comes to these approaches, including when it comes to protection of privacy, data collection, analysis, especially when dealing, with human rights issues and hate speech and disinformation, including these politically sensitive contexts. Maybe you have some reflections that you would like to share with us when it comes to this kind of dynamic. I think another angle, which is also very relevant, is of course, depending on the governance system, within which one finds oneself, having these data approaches can also pose challenges depending on how, who is accessing this data and who is accessing the monitoring applications, for instance. So maybe you can share some reflections on these two notes as you feel comfortable, just to have a little bit of a back and forth with our excellent panelists. Maybe I would then turn to Saijai, if you don't mind, if you have something to share with us on that point, you are most welcome to do so.
Yep. So in terms of open source investigation, what we try to investigate is what, who, where, when, why. So when I think about ethical consideration, there are three layers that I'm thinking about. The first one is the people who are working and investigating on this need to be safe. And I wanted to let you know that a lot of people who are working on this right now in Myanmar, a lot of them risking their life to do this work. So this work is considered illegal in Myanmar. So a lot of people in the team have to left the country. They left their family with the goal they really wanted to work on this issue. So which is illegal in Myanmar. They could be arrested. So the first thing is how to make sure that they're safe in terms of protect the information and protect the people that we work with. Mental health is also the big issue, and I feel like we need to talk more about mental health in data for peace and open source investigation, because we are the people who looking into this conflict data all the time, every day, and we are impacted by secondary trauma of the conflict. So these are the issues that I don't think we have the answer, but it's really critical that we look into mental health of the people who are working and having the mechanism in place. One of the options is that before people join the team working on collecting data for peace or working on open source investigation, we provide them what they will see. And then also not only when they join the team while they're working, there should be a mechanism to support them, and also when they leave the project. I wanted to emphasize on when people leave the project, because a lot of organizations just focus on you finish the contract with us, that's it. But actually the work that they do impact them after. So there needs to be a mechanism to support people who are working in this space before, during, the after. So that's in terms of the first layer, the people who are working on the conflict. The second layer, when we talk about ethical consideration, it's really important to think about who supply the data for us. I'm talking about open source investigation, but I think this is also applied to data for peace in general. There must be people on the ground who are sending you all this data, all the number that we can create graph. So it's really critical thinking about how could we make sure that they are safe when they're sending this data to us. In my work in open source investigation, when people send the photos, we need to make sure that if the photo sent from their balcony, we need to find a way to emit that. If the photo sent from their house, they might show the house number. The military could go back and track them. These are the person who's sending these images. So in terms of the second layer, we need to make sure that the people who send the data is safe, and we need to do all the things we can to protect them. So that's in terms of second layer, in terms of ethical consideration. The third one, which I think is really critical, not only the people who work on it, people who send the data. How are we collecting the data that impact an overall conflict? So giving example of open source investigation, we review in the report the geolocation of the conflict that happened. For example, let's say if there is a bomb at the church, we review the location of the church in the report and we send it to trusted partner. But what if this could lead to more attack to that village? Right? It's really important that whether the village themselves want this geolocation to be public. So these are the questions that we have to think about all the time by reviewing the data, who get the data, and will this lead to more repeat attack to that area? So the answer to the third question is also who we share the data, who have access to the data is really important. Related to that, in terms of how we impacted the conflict, I just want to give the example of one work that we do is in terms of gender-based violence. We've been tracking how military use Telegram as a way to dox women who speak out about politics. And then we're writing report about that. When I talk to a lot of women, they feel that a lot of report on gender-based violence, either on the medias or academics, they tell the story from the angle of a researcher who looking into the issue and the women were doxed and such. But not many researchers and the way we tell story from the woman perspective of what the story they wanted to tell. So anyway, so I think this all focus under the theme of like do no harm in the way that we present the data and make sure that how the data we present impacted the conflict and impacted the beneficiaries. So yeah, that's all, Helena.
Thank you so much for sharing those reflections. Of course, it's very challenging work that we are talking about today for many different reasons. Maybe I will then invite Asad. Would you like to also share some reflection on this question? Then please, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you. I think Saijai has made some excellent points, and I completely agree with them. It's very, very important. One other challenge that we had, specifically speaking of our own experiences, was essentially who to give all of this power. Because what we are doing essentially is collecting open source information from 4 platforms, including WhatsApp. And WhatsApp public groups have immense amounts of data if somebody has worked and probably would like to relate in this conversation. And they have original phone numbers. They have other personal data as well. So essentially, making something like this public, or making something like the toolkit that we have, for instance, open for use for anyone, could present a certain amount of concerns about the ethical use, but also the privacy, the digital privacy of the people we are talking about, right? So one of the solutions that we have come up with was to only give access to the NGOs and the civil society networks that we trust. Same goes for the newsrooms, because newsrooms have a certain editorial control and they have a certain hierarchy of how they use the data and they present them in the stories and so on. Same goes for civil society networks. For instance, there are many grassroots networks that are doing excellent work, for instance, specifically monitoring for and targeting at people who are inciting violence and hate speech against trans communities, for instance, in Pakistan, right? And same goes for a lot of other networks who are doing excellent work. So these are the networks who we feel we can trust in terms of the data and so on. But yeah, generally it's a big concern when working with open source data, specifically the kind of data that can present a challenge or a concern when it comes to privacy of individuals.
Thank you also to you for sharing your thoughts on this. I would like to also turn to Dr. Ahmed, if I may. So, having heard these interventions from the panelists, maybe you would like just to share a reflection on how you see, what are some of the good practices or recommendations that we can take with us when it comes for how to engage with governments and other actors when it comes to creating more let's say, tolerant societies in light of all of this. Anything else that you would like to bring? Thank you.
Okay, the one way we at the BPO we work is we have a kind of an advisory board where you have both the GO and the NGO, both the non-governmental side, the critics of the government, and also there are 3 government agencies, including the police and also National Defense College and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But at the same time, we have critiques of the government. The foremost critiques is the media house called the Daily Star. Then we have Action Aid. They work on gender. And we have 2 more NGOs. They work on minorities mainly. So, and micro minorities. Bangladesh has micro minorities. When they sit together, they look at the data, and our data, as I said, is quite robust to the point that even police would say that your data is far better than ours. And this is the reason, because they don't map 26 categories. That's that's very important, and they don't clean the data. We have a process of cleaning the data, which, as I said, UNDP New York helped us, gave us the technical support of how you clean the data. So we worked very closely with the UNDP officials on that. And so by the time it gets loaded in the platform, and you're free to get into Bangladesh Peace Observatory and see data. And as I said, you can yourself do the triangulation and all. So the media, they use a lot actually. And anybody working on violence, any researchers, even, we had people working on PhD looking at violence. They had to look into Bangladesh Peace Observatory because it's a huge data. And there's also a cluster map. You can go to the cluster map and you can actually look, pinpoint to the lowest level. We call it Thana, that's the lowest level, or a police station, if you can use the English word. The Thana, where they will tell you the source of the news also. So, it's as, clean as that. So you can look at the source, you can verify that. And as I say, that we depend not only on the quantitative data, but also look into the micro-narratives and to see how there is. So in terms of research, that's a plus point, but the policymakers, they use it a lot. We also did the same thing with UNDP. They approached us during the COVID-19 pandemic because we have a system of mapping data, and they wanted to map the social resilience, and which we happily did it. And it helped even the government to see whether they can open up. Some of the lockdowns were quite hard, as you know. And the reason is that we kept data on COVID-19 symptoms death, because the government was only flagging the COVID-19 death, but the newspaper were flashing symptoms death also. So we kept on mapping that data, and a research was done where it showed that from that data, well, 80% showed a negative, but 20% were positive. So if that is the case, even if you add 50%, government very quickly came to know that that's the maximum number of deaths happening in Bangladesh because of COVID-19, because death is something which is very difficult to hide in Bangladesh, given the concentration of population. So that helped the policymakers, very quickly to look into the possibility of opening up. So there are all kinds of possibilities, actually, particularly when you have 26 categories. So yes, we started with violent extremism. That was the entry point. And I remember UNDP was very eager to do on violent extremism only, but when we had a discussion, they saw the merit of including all the 26 categories. And the 26 categories, we also have extrajudicial killing, data on extrajudicial killing, which is very sensitive. Since we have this advisory board, both the police and the National Defense College, they say, no, let's keep the extrajudicial killing, because it will help us also to see what is happening. So you can go to the platform and look into the extrajudicial killing, and that also helps in the human rights, those activists who are working on that area. So, I think a platform of this kind, if that can be replicated in other countries, particularly in other South Asian countries and beyond, and then you can match each other, there are immense possibilities of working together, and not to mention helping the policymakers to come up with right kind of decisions as to what to do and what not to do.
Thank you for those very sort of thoughtful contributions on this topic. I was also in parallel trying to check whether we have any questions from participants in the chat, but I did not spot that. Mindful of time, but if there would be one question from the in-person participants, I think we could still capture that and swiftly bring it to our excellent panel. But for that, I might need the help of colleagues in the room. I think Branka is available to see whether there would be a question. And if so, we can take it.
I can help with that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can help with the question, but we're supposed to finish 3 minutes ago. So is there any question from the audience, and maybe a very quick response? I don't see any question from here. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, I understood we still had 2 minutes, so I wanted to make the most out of this. But then with that, I will thank then the panelists for your excellent interventions, for your availability, and also for the great partnership that you are extending to UNDP. Without our partners, obviously our reach is not as good as it is when we work together. So I think this is some of the the key findings from the discussions that we've had today when it comes to understanding what drives communities to intolerance and incitement to violence. We do need these very local, data-based application for understanding trends and capturing them really early on. And of course, the value of multi-stakeholder partnership is just something that came across, I think, throughout your interventions. This is not the kind of work that one actor alone can can address. It's a very complex, multifaceted challenge, and it takes any number of forms and shapes. But once again, thank you for sharing your reflections with us. It's an ongoing work, so we're happy to continue collaborating with you and continue the discussion in other formats. Thank you so much for your time. Also, thank you for the participants for having been with us in this session. All the best.